It's the Brad and John Show.
Brad and John Show, we're in double digits. This is June 10th, 2025. This is the C Block, which means we started right around 7:40. But, man, we're late this morning. It's 7:46. Okay, John, yesterday I threw out something that I thought was interesting. This L.A. riot thing is getting very interesting. And I threw out the Posse Comitatus thing. Remember we talked about this yesterday?
Yeah, I had never heard of that, so you mentioned it, Brad.
Okay, and I was uninformed on it yesterday. I mean, I knew what it was, but I want to give a little bit of information, which I think is sort of fascinating because I didn't even realize that it's been updated recently. Okay, let me just read this real quick. This is off of Wikipedia. The Posse Comitatus Act, and it's spelled Comitatus, is the United States federal law. I won't give the thing. Originally signed into law on June 18th, 1878, by President Rutherford B. Hayes, that limits the powers of the federal government in the use of federal military personnel to enforce domestic policies within the United States. That's what I talk about. Congress passed the act as an amendment to an Army appropriation bill following the end of the Reconstruction and updated in 1956, 1981, and 2021. It was just updated 4 years ago. Now, here's what's interesting about it. The act originally applied only to the United States Army, but a subsequent amendment in 1956 expanded its scope to the United States Air Force. In 2021, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022 further expanded the scope of the act to cover the United States Navy, Marine Corps, and Space Force. Now, here's what's interesting about this is the act does not prevent the Army National Guard or the Air National Guard under state authority from acting in law enforcement capacity within its home state or an adjacent state if invited by the state's governor. That's the controversy right now, because technically in California, Governor Newsom should have invited the National Guard in L.A., but Trump overruled him and just say, I don't say what, because Newsom is saying we don't want the National Guard, and Trump's saying too bad you get the National Guard. Now, this is also interesting. The United States Coast Guard under the Department of Homeland Security is not covered by the act either, primarily because it is an armed service. It is also a maritime law enforcement mission. Now, I don't know if you know this or not. I have a good friend that served in the Coast Guard. And what's interesting about this is the Coast Guard bounces back and forth depending upon if there's wartime or not. If we're in a declared war, like in World War II, the Coast Guard falls under the Department of Defense. And if we're not in a war, the Coast Guard falls back under, and now it's Homeland Security, but it used to fall back under, I believe, Department of Transportation. So the Coast Guard is like a quasi-military operation in peacetime, but it is a military operation in wartime. So the Posse Comitatus Act is interesting in the respect that, and this is the thing that a lot of people are saying, Trump is violating, because I read just this morning, now he's going to send in 700 Marines into Los Angeles. And I'm going like, okay, how's he? I mean, and the interesting thing about this is I have not heard one single person bring up the Posse Comitatus Act, which in previous administrations, this has been brought up. Matter of fact, I can remember they talked about this back in the George W. Bush administration, because there was one point in time after 9/11 when the military, remember the military was actually went to the airports. Remember back when they started flying again, you would go, it wasn't unusual for you to go to see, uniformed military guys with their M16s or their M4s in airports. And people go, that's a violation of Posse Comitatus because of the fact that the military should not be governing a civilian facility, a.k.a. an airport. So to me, nobody mentioning the Posse Comitatus Act as far as California is concerned, it's like, okay, where's everybody at on this? Because according to what I just read, what Trump has done is a clear violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. Your opinion on that?
Yeah, I just pulled up. I went to Google News, and it looks like dozens of news headlines about Posse Comitatus Act and whether it allows Trump to send troops to L.A. Reuters, which is one of the biggest wire services, has that as a headline, along with News Nation, ABC News, and others talk about Posse Comitatus. I think that's one of the areas it appears to be, Brad, of discussion. But it hasn't come up until just the last couple of days.
So the sad thing for me is here we go again, where what was the thing where Kamala Harris came out yesterday and said, "Oh, they're just," it's like what's like the classic. It's like the classic. What was that on CNN? Remember this? You can find this all over YouTube. The reporter from CNN is in Minneapolis. And he's standing in front of a building that's on fire. And he's talking about, the nonviolent protests continue here in Minneapolis. And it's like, the building's on fire behind you, dude. What do you mean nonviolent? Did the building
fiery but mostly peaceful was the headline.
Right. Did the building just spontaneously combust? Did the guy not pay or did the guy decide he was going to shut his business down and just burn the place down for arson? He's going to collect the insurance and stuff like that. And you watch the video of what's going on, and all you have to do is, I've been a big fan of KTLA. If you go to KTLA.com, it's Channel 5 out there in Los Angeles, and they've got their helicopter up constantly. And you see all the crazy, weird stuff going on. First off, I would not want to be a police officer in LA right now. I mean, and then the story that's gotten all this coverage. Have you seen this video of the Australian reporter that gets hit with the rubber bullet? Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't seen it.
An attractive woman from Australia who's reporting from one of the TV networks in Australia, she was on the air live, and she's standing like right in front of the police line. And apparently, if you look at it, it looks like she's between the police and the protesters. So she's sort of in the middle of the mix, so to speak. And she's doing a report in her beautiful Australian accent, and she gets nailed in the back of her leg. I think I got her in the back of her thigh with a rubber bullet, and she goes down. And one of the protesters, "Oh, you okay, honey?" That kind of stuff. And once again, how many news people, and people go, "Oh, that's horrible." They're saying the police targeted that news person. No. I mean, it's like, look at, if you go to some of these journalistic organizations, there are hundreds of journalists who have been killed. I mean, maybe not hundreds, but tens of journalists who've been killed in the Gaza Strip, because you embed yourself in Gaza and you're walking around with a microphone and a camera, and you're in a war zone. You take your chances. You take your chances that you're going to be shot by the Hamas people. You're going to be shot by the Israelis. The bomb's going to fall on you from the Israelis. That a bomb's going to blow up. I mean, it's one of those things. You take your chances. I mean, if you decide you would want to become a MMA, artist, or even like your profession, you love the WWE guys. I mean, people say it's fake. Well, being body slammed onto the canvas, I don't care how flexible that canvas is, that can't help your back. You know what I'm saying, John?
Yeah, it'll rearrange your vertebrae, your stack of dimes pretty quickly.
Right, and you know darn well that one of these situations that has come out through the WWF and now the WWE area, a lot of these guys are on unbelievable amounts of painkillers because they do get injured. They do have problems. They do have hamstring tears and problems with their backs. And look at the football players, the CTE and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is, that going in. It's like if you decide you're going to be a police officer, there's a chance that sometime in your career you're going to be punched, hit, kicked, shot, or stabbed, right? Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, not...
Yeah, I think that happens. And I think that's why, and I'll reference for the first time in C Block, but multiple times on this show, on TWMP Daily, Nick Schroer was talking about local control of the state review board for St. Louis Metropolitan Police, and being around cops who just have seen so many of their friends die or get injured. And Schroer talked about it in terms of the new pride and leadership that cops have today. But yeah, Brad, I mean, I think that's the cost of doing business, right? Like, you take that risk every time you pull a car over.
Yeah.
They could be a Brad Hildebrand type that knows the rules of a perfect traffic stop, or they could be a deranged lunatic.
And a gun could come out and point it at you. I mean, I personally, one of the guys I worked with when I worked for the police department was shot by some drug dealers. I mean, shot and stabbed, and to the point where I went and saw him in the hospital. And there was a point in time when they didn't know if he was going to live. And probably about 4 or 5 days after the incident where you could actually go as visitors, I went and visited him. And I thought and the interesting thing about it was, this was a guy at the time, who was a former Green Beret. And this guy had seen combat in many places around the world. Who'd have thunk that in Illinois, the department I worked for, he got essentially jumped by a couple drug dealers. And the reason he wasn't killed was that he had at the time, he had a little Beretta 380 semi-automatic, and he had it on safe. And they jumped him from behind. He was plain clothes at the time. He was doing undercover work for drug interdiction. They jumped him from behind. They stabbed him a couple times. They grabbed his gun, and they tried to kill him. Literally, the one guy was on top of him stabbing. The other guy pulled his gun and had it aimed at his head and couldn't get the gun to fire. And at the last minute, the guy realized the safety was off. He pulled the safety off, fired the gun, and my friend, the police officer, turned his head, and the bullet, it's sort of like a Trump thing, the bullet went through his ear, like, even more than with Trump, and they thought they killed him. They thought they hit him because, just like Trump, blood started going everywhere. Oh, man, headshot, he's dead. And they ran off. And the interesting part of it was he rolled over, picked up his gun after being stabbed and shot, and unloaded the magazine at these guys. And they think that he did catch one of them because they'd found some blood back in the woods where this was going on. So once again, it comes with the territory. And the situation that I see on this is that if you read the story about who the ICE guys were going after, we talked about this yesterday. They're not going after Grandma Smith, who, came from Guadalajara, who's been here for 20 years, who's running a seamstress building, a business out of her house in, East L.A. or something like that. They're going after the convicted criminals, the guys who are the gangbangers, the guys who have, remember just recently there was a couple of guys they deported that had Interpol warrants out for their arrest. You know what I mean? Oh, and it's just like our buddy, the Maryland man that they brought back. Now, now they bring him back. And they're going to nail him on the fact that he's been not implicated. They have the video. Do you know that whole bizarre story? The news.
No,
media,
I don't.
The news media was interesting because of the fact that somebody did a Freedom of Information Act because there was a report that he was pulled over by, I believe, a Kentucky state trooper or Tennessee trooper, one of those two states, and that he was driving this truck, or like an SUV that had been outfitted with extra seats. There were like 8 guys in the van, and he told them they were from St. Louis. He was driving from St. Louis. That's a whole interesting story. This is our Maryland man guy. And they pulled over this van, and it's either Kentucky or Tennessee State Police called, and they kept him on a traffic stop, and they called ICE. This was under Biden, and they said, we're not interested. Let the guy go. Who cares? So now it comes out that this is possibly one of 100 trips he made back and forth between the Southwest states where he was bringing illegals into the country. And the guy he worked for is in jail right now. And the guy in jail even said, yep, he was one of my guys. He was one of my transporters. Okay, he's the Maryland man. He's such a great husband. And to the point where, go back and read the court records. And the interesting part of that was that some news organization filed a Freedom of Information Act, whatever it is in that state. It varies from state to state. Sunshine Act in our state, Missouri. And they got the body cam video of the state police trooper, pulling him over and talking the whole bit. That's how they filed charges against him, because they're saying there's enough evidence from the body cam of this state trooper to prove that he was essentially transporting illegals. He was human trafficking. Oh, but he's the Maryland man. He's got this wife. He's a wonderful husband. Even though she went to court and signed an affidavit that he beat the crap out of her. Oh, he's such a wonderful guy. We need more like him in the United States. And
your point is that's who ICE is looking at. They're not looking at the seamstress from Guadalajara.
Right.
In East LA. They're looking for real violent criminals.
They're going after the crumb bums. They're going after the as if you watch the Bosch series, they're going after the S birds. That's what Bosch would call them. They're the S birds, and you can figure out what the rest of S is. And that's who they're going after. So essentially, when you get Governor Newsom and the Mayor Bass, this is terrible. These ICE coming in taking our citizens. I heard a guy yesterday, and it made perfect sense. And I remember hearing this years ago. And people are saying, why would Biden let all these people in? Why would Biden let those people in? And you know what the interesting thing about this is?
What's that?
When they do the census, they count everybody, whether
they count total population. Yeah, Mike Cernovich tweeted about this yesterday.
Right.
Because his estimate is that if you took illegals out, Democrats would lose a number of congressional seats. Your point that you were about to make, Brad, is that in the census, you count total population.
Yes.
You don't count voting citizens.
Exactly. You don't count citizens in the United States. You count people here legally or illegally. So if you get into a city like New York, where you stack the deck, where you have, hundreds of thousands of illegals in there, that gives the state of New York much more push, much more power, because the number of representatives are assigned by, we know that better than anybody because we lost one of our reps. Missouri used to have 9 congressional districts. Now we only have 8. And the reason for that was, it wasn't that Missouri shrank, it was that other states got bigger. So proportionally, we lost one of those reps because of the fact that I can't remember which one of the states didn't.
I remember, and it was because people left Missouri because they heard that the Hoffmans had moved in. And so they immediately canceled their Hillerman lawn service, which is a totally believable anecdote and replicable and scalable. And then they decided to move states because the Hoffmans were here, Brad. That's a real thing. We lost a congressional district because of it.
John, do you ever remember the original Saturday Night Live when...
I do.
Remember?
And you know what? Are you going to call me what Dan Aykroyd called Jane Curtin? We've been doing this show too long. I just see where you're going, Brad.
You knew exactly where I was heading with this. If you don't know what we're talking about, on the end of 60 Minutes, do you know how that started? Do you know the history of that?
No, I don't.
On the end of 60 Minutes, there used to be a guy and a gal who
called point counterpoint.
Point counterpoint, and they would go back and forth. That was the end of 60 Minutes, and they would essentially, one was left, one was right, and they would go back and forth, and they would start to argue. So they used to do a Saturday Night Live bit with Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin. Remember that? There was one classic episode.
Yeah. Brad, I'd love to stay and chat, but the Priscillas are here to cut my grass.
Where he says, "You ignorant." And I won't say the word, right?
You can't say it, Brad, not for FCC.
Right.
Signed by the FCC, I bet the Washington Missourian would write a story about it, right? Because they hate you.
They do. They did write a story about me, and when I got things straightened out, they at first were refusing to write a story about the fact that I got things straightened out.
They totally know who you are, and they care, Brad.
Yeah, and the sad part of it is we lose another elite family. Another royalty of Washington will no longer be able to walk around with their nose up in the air. And, oh, you poor people that go to Our Lady of Lourdes, we go to Borgia. We're the elite. We're the elite in Washington. We're the Borgiaites. And our kids go to Borgia High School. We don't send them to that crappy Washington High School.
Let it all out, Brad. This has been a really therapeutic show for you. Just let it all out, Brad. In the name of Posse Comitatus, the end.